Verstappen did not just expose a Red Bull weakness at Silverstone. He exposed a moment the RB22 stopped feeling like a weapon. Because when Max says there is no point racing, after a weekend of race start issues, 2 separate car problems, extra painful qualifying, worrying telemetry, and a Silverstone accident, that is not just anger. That is a red alert. This is the driver who can fight Ferrari, the driver who can pressure Mercedes, the driver who can make McLaren look over their shoulder, the driver who usually turns a difficult Red Bull into something terrifying. But even Verstappen cannot dominate if the car gives him a new problem every time he needs certainty. And that is what makes this so dangerous. A bad setup can be fixed. A slow weekend can be survived. A crash can be explained. But a car that destroys trust, that is much harder to repair. Start issues again. Painful qualifying. 2 problems with the RB22. Telemetry telling a worrying story. A bleak Verstappen verdict. And now, after Silverstone, the question is no longer whether Max still has the speed. The question is whether Red Bull still has a car he believes is worth racing. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why the Silverstone weekend hit Red Bull so hard, you have to start with one uncomfortable truth. Max Verstappen does not complain like an ordinary driver. When some drivers say the car feels bad, it can sound like frustration. When some drivers say the balance is wrong, it can sound like a normal part of a difficult weekend. When some drivers say the race is slipping away, the paddock listens for a moment, then moves on. But when Verstappen says there is no point racing, the entire garage should freeze. Because that phrase is not just emotion, it is diagnosis. It tells you that, from inside the cockpit, the car was not giving him a platform to compete. Not in the way Verstappen expects. Not in the way Red Bull needs. Not in the way a championship-level car should behave when its best driver is trying to drag it back into the fight. And that is why Silverstone felt different. The crash was dramatic, but the crash was only the loudest part of the story. The clues had already been building. Race start issues had hit Red Bull again. Verstappen had already spoken about 2 problems with the car. Qualifying had already been described as extra painful, and the telemetry was already telling a worrying story behind his struggles. That is not one bad moment. That is a weekend closing in from every direction. First, the start issues, then the car problems, then the painful qualifying, then the worrying data, then the bleak verdict, then the accident. That is how a difficult weekend becomes something much more serious. Because in Formula One, a crash can sometimes hide the real problem. Everyone focuses on the final image, the car going off, the gravel, the frustration, the radio, the result disappearing. But the real question is always what came before it. What did the driver already know? What did the car already show? What had the team already seen in the data? And what was Verstappen already feeling before the world saw the accident? That is where the RB22 becomes the center of the story. Because a car does not need to be perfect for Verstappen to fight with it. That has never been the requirement. He can handle a sharp car. He can handle a nervous car. He can handle a car that demands precision and punishes small mistakes. In some ways, that kind of car can even suit him because he has the confidence to live where other drivers hesitate. But there's one thing he cannot build a race around. A car that keeps changing the question. A difficult car is one thing. An unpredictable car is another. A difficult car can still be understood. It can still be read. It can still be pushed if the driver knows where the weakness lives. Maybe it lacks traction. Maybe it is unstable under braking. Maybe it struggles in dirty air. Maybe the tires fall away after a few laps. Those problems are frustrating, but they can be managed. The driver adapts. The team adjusts. The strategy works around it. But when the car gives a new problem every time, the driver cannot build trust. And trust is what Verstappen needs most. Not comfort. Trust. That is the difference many people miss. Verstappen does not need the RB22 to feel easy. He needs it to feel honest. He needs the car to tell him the truth before the limit arrives. He needs it to behave in a way he can predict, even if that behavior is aggressive. He needs to know that when he commits to a corner, the car will answer in the same language it used a lap before. At Silverstone, the story looked different. The car was not simply slow. It was uncertain. And uncertainty is what destroys a driver's freedom. Because every Formula One lap is a chain of trust. The driver trusts the brakes. Then he trusts the front tires. Then he trusts the rear to follow. Then he trusts the power delivery. Then he trusts the car to put energy into the tires without punishing him later. Every corner is built on the belief that the machine will react in a way the driver understands. Break that chain and the lap becomes negotiation. Not attack. Negotiation. Can I brake there? Can I turn in that hard? Can I trust the rear? Can I use that curb? Can I launch properly? Can I push the tires? Or will the balance disappear? Can I race this car? Or am I only surviving it? That is a question Silverstone forced into the open. And when Verstappen sounds like he is asking whether there is any point racing, that is not just a bad mood. That is a driver telling the world the car is no longer letting him do the thing he is built to do. Fight. That is why the start issues matter so much. A race start is not just the beginning. It is the first proof of whether the car is ready to obey. The lights go out, and in a fraction of a second, the driver discovers whether the clutch, the tires, the power delivery, and the grip are all aligned. If the launch works, the driver can attack. If it fails, the race begins with damage control. And the source points to Red Bull being hit by start issues again at Silverstone. That word, again, is the wound. It suggests Verstappen was not dealing with a clean new problem. He was dealing with something that had returned. Something that already carried frustration. Something that could make the first seconds of the race feel unstable before the real battle had even begun. For a driver like Verstappen, that is brutal, because he races from control. If he gets a strong start, he can place the car where he wants. He can decide whether to attack or defend. He can shape the first lap. He can put pressure on rivals instead of being trapped inside their race. But if the start becomes uncertain, everything changes. He can lose track position. He can fall into traffic. He can overheat tires. He can lose rhythm. He can be forced into risk earlier than planned. And all of that comes before the car's other problems even have a chance to show themselves. That is why the Silverstone weekend felt like a chain reaction. A start issue does not stay at the start. It spreads. It affects position. Position affects air. Air affects tire temperature. Tire temperature affects balance. Balance affects confidence. Confidence affects lap time. Lap time affects strategy. Strategy affects the entire race. One weakness becomes many. And when Verstappen already has two problems with the car, when qualify has already been painful, when telemetry is already worrying, the start issue becomes more than a detail. It becomes another sign that the RB22 was not giving him a clean fight. That phrase matters. A clean fight. That is all a driver wants. He does not need everything to be easy. He does not need the car to be dominant. He does not need rivals to disappear. He needs a machine to give him a fair chance to use his talent. At Silverstone, Verstappen seemed to feel that chance was missing. And that is where the telemetry becomes dangerous. Telemetry is the car's confession. Drivers can exaggerate when they are angry. Fans can argue about what they saw. Commentators can debate whether a car looked nervous or whether a driver was pushing too hard. But telemetry is different. Telemetry shows a hidden truth, where the car lost time, where the throttle could not be applied, where the steering correction appeared, where the speed disappeared, where the balance failed to support the driver, where the machine did not match the expectation. So when the story says the telemetry told a worrying story behind Verstappen's Silverstone struggles, Red Bull cannot simply call this drama. The data gave the frustration weight, and that is terrifying for a team because data removes the escape route. If Verstappen is angry but the data says the car was fine, the team can calm the situation. They can show in the traces. They can explain the tires, the track, the conditions. They can separate emotion from fact. But if the telemetry supports the feeling, the team has a deeper problem because now the driver's anger has evidence behind it. And a Verstappen complaint with evidence behind it is one of the loudest alarms Red Bull can hear. That is the first major lesson of this story. The RB22 was not only being criticized by emotion, it was being questioned by patterns. Start issues again. Two car problems. Painful qualifying. Worrying telemetry. A bleak Verstappen verdict. Those are layers. And when layers stack like that, they change the meaning of the accident. The accident stops looking like an isolated mistake. It starts looking like the final result of a car that had been pushing its driver toward frustration all weekend. That is why Red Bull's situation is so delicate. They do not just need to repair damage. They need to repair confidence. Because Verstappen's greatest value is not only that he is fast, it is that he believes he can bend a race around himself. When Max feels connected to the car, the entire grid changes. Rivals defend earlier. Strategists react faster. Teams feel pressure before he even reaches them. That is a Verstappen effect. But that effect depends on the car giving him something to believe in. If the car becomes a puzzle, he is still fast, but the fear changes. Rivals stop seeing him as inevitable. They start seeing a chance. They hear no point racing, and they do not just hear frustration. They hear vulnerability. And in Formula One, vulnerability is an invitation. Ferrari will look at it. Mercedes will look at it. McLaren will look at it. Every rival will look at it and wonder if the RB22 can be forced into the same uncomfortable place again. Can Red Bull be pressured at the start? Can Verstappen be trapped in traffic? Can the car's balance be exposed in qualifying? Can the telemetry weakness show up again under different conditions? Can frustration turn into hesitation? That is how rivals think. They do not need Red Bull to collapse. They only need a door. Silverstone may have shown them one. And that is what makes this block of the story so important. The real danger is not that Verstappen had one miserable weekend. The real danger is that the weekend created a blueprint, a way to hurt Red Bull, pressure the start, force the car outside its comfort zone, make Verstappen fight the machine before he can fight the field. Because if Verstappen is busy solving the RB22, he is not fully free to destroy everyone else. That is a massive shift. For years, Red Bull's strongest image has been Verstappen as a hunter. Even when he starts behind, he feels inevitable. Even when the car is not perfect, he feels dangerous. Even when rivals have hope, he has a way of crushing it. But Silverstone showed a different picture. A driver frustrated by the car, a team facing repeated issues, a weekend where the telemetry raised questions, a verdict so bleak it sounded like the fight had been taken away. That picture gives rivals oxygen, and Red Bull knows it. They know the car cannot keep asking Verstappen to cover every weakness. They know new problem every time is not a sustainable championship phrase. They know painful qualifying cannot become normal. They know start issues cannot keep returning. They know worrying telemetry cannot be ignored.